Welcome back to Sabbath School Boot Camp. Sabbath School Boot Camp is here to help you think critically and creatively about your Sabbath School lesson. Now, this is week 11, the Christian and work. So let's get working. Welcome back to Sabbath School Boot Camp. Our mission is to help you think creatively and critically about your Sabbath School lesson. So let's get in the bunker and get going. The very first words in this lesson are, work is God's idea. Sure, blame God for everything, why don't you? What I like about this idea of work is that it confronts the presupposition people have that heaven, the paradise of God's presence, is a place where people recline on clouds and just strum their harps all day. As if paradise is a place where we don't have to work anymore, as if that's what makes it paradise. And so people think, heaven sounds boring, why would I want to be there? I like this idea of paradise as a place where we work, and that this work is not burdensome, it's not backbreaking, it's not soul-crushing drudgery, it's meaningful work, it's effective work, it's creation work that is bringing order out of chaos, right? That's what tending the garden is, and that's the kind of work we aspire to even in this life. Now, the lesson also takes some time to warn us about letting work become who we are. Man is more than just an employee, the lesson says. And I think we have a greater appreciation for that principle today than at any other time since the Industrial Revolution. Younger people especially want meaningful work, work that makes a difference. The Gordon Gekko mindset that greed is good and that we should just work is somewhat discredited these days. I mean, big tech companies try to ensure that their employees have a good work-life balance, and yet I wonder if we've ever worked as hard as we do these days. Anyways, I don't want to go down that road. There's a lot you can talk about this week. Here is our lesson summary. We are called to work, but to work God's way, not as a slave to economic machines, but in the spirit of our Creator God. Here are a couple questions to get your class talking. First, what is a job you have had that was meaningful work? What made it meaningful to you, in your opinion? The second question, how is work spiritual? In what way do we connect to God through our work? Slipping over to Sunday, we find a frenetic pair of paragraphs about the word work. First, the lesson informs us that the word work is a solid Anglo-Saxon word with no frills. It is one syllable in English, yet it has many possible meanings. This sounds like a freshman college paper where your teacher asks you to write an essay about the meaning of the word work, and you have no idea what to write. So you write things like, well, it's a word, and it comes from Anglo-Saxon, and it's a short word, just one syllable. Only a few words in the English language start with W, and it has a lot of meanings. What in the world, guys? And this just goes on because the lesson says, out of necessity, we work to put food on our tables, pay the bills, and save a little for hard times. No kidding? Is that what all of us do? Dear college professors who wrote this lesson, do you really need to remind the adult Sabbath school class why people work? I think one of these college presidents just farmed this one out to a freshman, and I will offer my best $10 for that freshman to come forward and admit that they were paid to write this. If you're that freshman, contact me. Let me know, okay? We're going to get to the bottom of this. But look, my favorite line is at the end of the second paragraph where it says, give a teenager a job and there's one fewer candidate for delinquency. Whoa, Grandpa, settle down there. It just seemed like we were driving along nicely talking about the meaning of work, and then you just swerved to nail that high schooler on the sidewalk. Get a job, man! Anyways, the lesson inevitably moves us to Genesis 3:19, where we find that a consequence of the fall is that farming, for instance, will require more effort. But the point the lesson is trying to make here is that work is another casualty of the fall. Laboring in the garden, looking after the animals, was meant to be a practice that fills you, not a drudgery that drains you. And we need to look at work as something distinct from one's occupation in life. I don't think Adam and Eve clocked in at 8 and were gone by 5. There are many people out there whose life work is distinct from their occupation. Maybe Frank is a dentist, but his life's work was in writing a beautiful sonata. That's where his heart was at. That's where he invested himself. That's where his passion was. When Genesis 2 says that God finished his work, it doesn't mean that God had a construction job, okay? We need to rescue the word work. Go check out this theology. It's called theologyofwork.org if you want to explore this idea a little bit more. Moving over to Monday, the lesson defines work as the doingness of life and seems to associate it with physical labor, right? The work of your hands. Even, as the lesson says, if that just means typing on your keyboard. Nice. I don't think that we need to define work as physical labor. It just seems to limit it for no reason. Intellectual work is just as much work as shoveling the dirt, just a different kind of work. And I've done both kinds of work. Worked construction for 6 years, been a pastor for 10 years. They're just different kinds of work. The lesson gives us a series of verses in order to lead us to the point that work is meaningful. We were made and meant to work. We can take pride in our good work. Work is a good thing in two other senses as well that the lesson doesn't bring out as much. First, the virtuous sense, work as the opposite of laziness. The old word for this kind of work is industry. We want to be industrious people. Second, work in the vocational sense, that God has put us on this planet to care for his creation and to accomplish his will. So Christians should have a positive, robust appreciation for work. If we Adventists rest because God rested, then we work because, everybody now, God worked. Trotting over to Tuesday, the lesson gives us 5 chapters of the Bible to read, and if you are the type of student who will read all 5 chapters, then I pronounce a blessing upon you, your family, and your cow. The point of reading these 5 chapters is to show you that God was very particular about how those Israelite workers were to build his sanctuary and everything associated with it. The lesson asks us about how particular God was, and obviously he was very particular, gave a lot of detailed instructions. It then asks what it tells us about God's character that he was so particular. And there's a few things you can say there, but I want to focus on one answer to that question, and that is this: God wants to work with us. He likes collaboration. The lesson says that God gave 150 different rules he wanted the workers to follow, and I'm going to take their word for it because I'm not going to count all that, okay? So God is like a heavenly OSHA. That number seems to point to the idea that God was very particular. And again, I agree with that, but we cannot forget that this was also a collaboration. God told the artisans to make cherubim out of hammered gold, but he didn't tell them exactly what they should look like, right? Like, give me a picture of the angel. Did the workers know what these cherubim looked like? Look, guys, God gave a lot of rules in these chapters, but when you really think about it, you realize he didn't give that many. I mean, he left a lot of it up to the artisan's imagination. And that's crazy because God obviously knows what a cherub looks like, but it's as if he said, I'm not going to tell them exactly how to do it. I'm not going to show them a picture of a cherub. I want to see what these humans come up with. God wanted our creativity even when it came to depicting the things of heaven. That's pretty cool. Walking over to Wednesday, we are talking about the spiritual side of work. I don't think Galatians 5 is the place you want to be here, but hey, the point of this page is that we cannot separate our work from our spiritual side. In John 5, Jesus said, "My Father is always at his work to this very day, and I too am working." Jesus sets the example here. First, we must discover where our Father is working in the world. He's always working, Jesus says. Second, we must join him. And when we meet God someday and he asks what we did for 80 years, I doubt he will be much impressed by us saying, well, I put in 35 years at the factory. We were put on this planet to work with God. That's the kind of work that I think that especially is meaningful to God. Does this mean our careers are pointless? No. I mean, sometimes our career is really meaningful work that makes a difference in the world. And sometimes it's just a means to provide for your family, which is a good and noble thing. But our lives should be aimed at the higher kind of work that God has called us to. And this is our vocation. Maybe he called you to be a public school teacher, to model compassion and wisdom and patience in the classroom to the next generations. In that case, your vocation and your occupation are the same. But your vocation and your occupation don't always align, right? Remember that dentist whose passion, whose calling was to produce that sonata? And the quest we all have in life is discovering that vocation, that calling of God to a particular life's work, and then doing it. trucking over to Thursday, we are wrapping up by talking about stewardship. Now, don't run away. I know when the elder gets up front to preach about stewardship, what they often mean is giving your tithes and offerings. Now, the lesson begins with Ecclesiastes 9:10, which tells us to do whatever we do with all of our might. But the lesson there isn't really about work per se when you read Ecclesiastes 9. Solomon is really just telling us to live life with gusto because you're going to die, and that's the end of it all. So that's cheerful. More appropriate, I think, is 1 Corinthians 10:31, where Paul tells us that whatever we do, we should do it for the glory of God, which is to say, we dedicate with purpose everything we do to his glory. It's not that a thing is inherently spiritual and another thing is inherently not spiritual. It's that we dedicate it all to God's glory, whatever it is, even if it doesn't have any obvious spiritual connection. So if you hire me to dig a pool in your backyard, which I do not recommend, I'm going to dig that pool in such a manner that God is glorified. That's going to mean different things to different folks, but I think it should mean that I don't cheat you, that I do quality work, and so on. Imagine if people said, I made sure to hire a Christian because I know they will do good work, good quality work. That would be great. My grandmother loves Amish furniture for this reason. The Amish have a reputation for doing good work, and it's because of their desire, I think, to glorify God through their work. Now, I want to close by reminding you of Deuteronomy 8, verses 17 and 18. God here is warning his people against the thought that through their own strength they have become rich. Remember the Lord your God, God says, for it is he who gives you the ability to produce wealth. So we are stewards in our work, recipients of the gifts of God which enable us to accomplish whatever it is that we accomplish. So even if you start a $1 trillion company, you owe that company to God. Please pay tithe to our church. So is there any room then to take pride in our work? I mean, yes, we take pride in our work because we have used the gifts, the tools that God has given us to build a great big beautiful thing for him. And that's great. That's all the time we got this week, guys. So class dismissed. We'll see you next week.